Alright everyone, it's about that time. The Nintendo DS versus the PlayStation Portable. The games. There is no way to choose this because, okay, so here's the thing. If we look at game quantity, we give it to the DS. If we look at game quality, it goes to both. Like, there's no, okay, I gotta take the glasses off. Have you guys ever seen a glasses-less grotesque? We're taking the glasses off for a minute because this is one of those professor takes off the glasses and gets real with you for a minute, okay, Chief? Look. When it comes to the DS and, oh gosh, I look so weird without glasses. They gotta go back on. I look like an alien. Listen, Chief, the DS had a bit of Wii syndrome where the device got so popular that it was just shuffled down, just buried with shovelware. But when you took the time to search a little bit, you'll find your Chrono Triggers. You'll find your Neo The World Ends With You. You'll find your Mario Kart DS. That being said, yeah, there was still a lot of shovelware in the system. So while you could technically give the quantity count to DS, when it comes to sheer quality, it depends. I mean, don't get me wrong, you guys know me. I'm the type of guy where I never dunk on any video game ever, just because I don't believe in doing that. It's very disrespectful to the artists and the developers that created it. But it's also very obvious when you have games that were made by people that literally just wanted to cash in on the DS hype. Look, like, I'm not gonna say names, I'm not gonna point out certain games, but I'm just gonna say, you know it when you see it. The games that are barely functional as video games, that's where I can, like, here's the thing. A lot of people complain about video games when it's completely unjustified. Like, I'm gonna throw out a hot take right here. The hate for Lord of the Rings Gollum was completely overblown. I played that game front to back, and it was a functional experience. There might have been, like, a glitch or two, and, you know, there's something to be said about that. We're like, yeah, maybe sure, certain games need to be polished a bit more, but it's far from being a game where it's like, okay, this is alpha stage. But during the DS era, there were some games where it's like, okay, this game isn't even a beta, like this is almost like an alpha stage. How did this even release? It's barely functioning. Is my DS even gonna survive through this one lap of this race? Like, when a game is that broken to where you're questioning if the device will even stay on long enough for you to finish it, then you can start complaining. So there was many more examples of that on DS. Was there ever an example where a game froze my... Actually, I gotta stop right there. Yes, there was actually games that have crashed my DS before. But when we start talking about quality, I mean, the DS and PSP, when it comes to the quality, because, you know, the DS itself can't help what games are or aren't on it. You know what I mean? Like, you know, you're gonna have some of that shovelware on every device no matter what. Look at the, you know, the PS5, it's an amazing system, but look on the PSN store. There's so much shovelware, you know, for like the easy platinum trophies. I don't get why people care about trophies. It's stupid. I mean, if you're a trophy hunter, that's cool, but for the people that literally buy those games just to get easy platinums, like, what's even the point at that point? But anyway, okay, going back to what I was saying. The device itself can't help what shovelware is on there. So when we look at the sheer quality of games, I think we might just have to be honest with ourselves and give a point to both of them. Because I couldn't imagine a world without the DS, and I also couldn't imagine a world without the PSP. I need my Persona 3 portables. And while, yes, Persona 3 Portable is technically just like an iteration of the original Persona 3 on PS2, Portable is different enough to where it almost feels like a completely different experience, and there's different things added to the game with the whole new campaign. And even beyond that, if you know, move past that and just look at the exclusive games to it, you had games like God of War, Chains of Olympus, and Ghost of Sparta and such, and then you had other games like Little Big Planet Portable, you know, which was basically like a brand new PSP experience based off of the original PS3 game, because there's a bit of a misconception sometimes that like the Little Big Planet games are on the portable devices like PSP, and I'd say PS Vita to a lesser extent, because I have seen some confusion as to like, oh wait, isn't this just the PS3 game, but da-da-da-da-da, then people kind of have to reiterate for them. But no, the Little Big Planet games, like all of them are unique, and again, while the one on PSP does kind of feel more or less like a spin-off of the first game, it has some similar aspects, it's a completely brand new experience, and even if you play the original Little Big Planet, it's worth playing there, and there's just so many examples of that, of games that are exclusive to the system. Secret Agent Clank, Daxter, and then you have so many like amazing spin-offs, or just like, I don't want to say like reboots of games, but games that were clearly trying to be a bit standalone on the device, like towards launch especially, games that were just called Gran Turismo, just called Dynasty Warriors. Like, there wasn't any numbers in the title, they were just trying to do a new thing on the portable device, and there were so many, like, innovative, boundary-pushing experiences, not just in terms of graphics, but also in terms of gameplay. You had games like Spider-Man 3 in 2007, where it was a completely open-world, free web-swinging Spider-Man game on the PlayStation Portable. You also had really fun and quirky little ports to the PSP with, like, The Godfather Mob Wars, which was essentially the PS2, Xbox 360, and PS3 game, but, you know, just, you know, kind of like squeezed down a bit to work on the PSP. As I was listing off all the versions of The Godfather, I also forgot to mention that it was on the Wii, which was also another really fun version of the game. The Godfather was just an amazing game in general. Love that game. Absolute masterpiece. Same with the sequel, The Godfather 2. I wish we could see like a, you know, whether it be like a remaster or a port of that game or just like a brand new sequel to that game, but with licensing and everything, I'm sure it's a nightmare. And hey, they just announced a new Mafia game, Mafia the Old Country, so that'll give me my Godfather type fix. But anyways, yeah, you know, so that was like a really cool thing that we saw there. We saw some games like that. Then we also had the PSP minis, which were so cool. We had like the Terminator PSP mini game, which was really fun. And then we had, so, you know, some of like the PlayStation Network games and such, like Super Stardust, which Stardust has always been one of my favorite like shooter franchises, you know, as they call it, a shmup. For any of you that have been watching the channel for a while, you know I love my shmups. And once again, the list just goes on and on and on. Dragon Ball Shin Budokai, like just saying that right there just gets me in my nostalgic feels just because I love that game so much. There's just so many phenomenal games on the PSP. You also have some games that kind of harken back to simpler times, you know, like Luminous, for example, where it's almost, I don't want to say it's like Tetris because it's not really like Tetris, but like, you know, looking at it at first, you might kind of think like Tetris or whatever, but that game's like, you know, it's just one of my favorite puzzle games of all time between the soundtrack and the graphics and just, I don't know, there's something about the way that that game gets my dopamine senses firing that I just absolutely love, and there were so many amazing experiences to be had that are both unique and also just, you know, came from the PSP, whether they were ported to other systems later, ported from other systems before to the PSP, or just exclusive to the PSP at the moment. And then we look at the DS, and man, when it comes to the games, once again, the quality is just flying off the charts here. We have launch titles like Super Mario 64 DS, we have games like New Super Mario Bros. DS, Mario Kart DS, Neo, and then we have the amazing ports like Chrono Trigger and remakes like Final Fantasy III, which was a 3D remake of the original Final Fantasy III, not the original Final Fantasy III from SNES, which was actually Final Fantasy VI, but the actual Final Fantasy III from Japan, which never came to the US, but did finally come to the US on the DS, called Final Fantasy III, at the actual Final Fantasy III this time, like for real this time, and it's a 3D remake. And then there's also certain conversations to be had where like sometimes the same game would be on the DS and the PSP, but the PSP version could have been seen as more advanced or impressive. Like we had Toy Story 3, which was like one thing on the DS, but then on the PSP it was the same thing as the console game, but not the exact same as the console game, because there was actually like multiple versions of Toy Story 3. So you had like the Xbox 360 and PS3 version of it, but then you also had like the PS2 version of it, which was then ported to the PSP, and then you also had the DS version of it, but that was completely different from both the PS2 and PSP and the PS3 and Xbox 360 version. It was like it's completely own thing. So really, if you want to get the full Toy Story 3 video game experience, you have to play the game 3 different times on at least 3 different types of devices, but make sure that you're playing the right version that you're actually looking for. And one thing I will say about the DS is that it was definitely more multiplayer friendly. Like obviously there was ways to do multiplayer on PSP, but the DS was obviously much more accessible, or just much more easy when it came to setting up multiplayer. Like you go to Mario Kart, click multiplayer, click you know, like set up multiplayer match, somebody else on the DS goes to download, play, and that's that, you're into the match. You could obviously do that on the PSP, but obviously it was just not as, I guess, accessible or intuitive like we were talking about before, to where it's like, yeah, you know, if you're familiar with the device, it's very easy to set up, but there was a case to be made that on the DS it was just much more synchronized, I guess, or there was just a much better understanding of like, hey, if you're gonna play a game with your friend, you know, one person goes to the game, the other person most times didn't even need a cartridge, which was like another bonus there, to where like, okay, you know, if you're playing on a DS, usually only one person actually needed to own the game, then the other person just needed to go to download, play, and they could play the game too, even if they didn't own it. Sometimes they needed to, but you know, a lot of times no. And again, talking about all the other innovations that we saw with the DS just due to the hardware, like I think of like the Call of Duty games that were ported to DS, which surprisingly had like multiplayer, and even Call of Duty Black Ops had zombies in it, and they all had their own full-fledged, unique campaigns that weren't even ports to the console versions. Like, they were just full-on original stories. So if you've told yourself that you've beaten every Call of Duty before, you probably haven't, if you haven't beaten the Call of Duty games on DS yet. But if you have beaten the ones on DS yet, then congratulations, you've actually beaten all the Call of Duty games. Well, actually, maybe not. Have you played Strike Team on iOS? I have. Have you? If you haven't, then it's probably too late because, well, it was delisted years ago. But hey, if you can find like a ROM on Android or iOS for it, go crazy. It's actually a pretty great game. It's very reminiscent of like Black Ops 2, has a lot of the same assets in it. It's actually a pretty great story. And then even beyond all of the amazing games that are on the DS, like the high-profile ones that everybody always points to, you know, even with the shovelware, I feel like there's a lot of charm there, and like with a lot of the licensed games and stuff. But again, you know, the PSP even had its fair share of stuff like that. Less on the shovelware side of things, but definitely with like the licensed games, because it was during that era. So I really don't know. I honestly, some people might call this cheating, but I'm just gonna have to give a point to both, because I couldn't, again, imagine a world without the PSP, and I couldn't imagine a world without the DS. They're both amazing systems, and they both have an amazing library of games, and to this day I find myself going back to both. In my heart, both the DS and the PSP are winners.